Well, 79 years ago today, Allied forces initiated an invasion of 5 Nazi-controlled beaches in Normandy, France, in an iconic battle known as D-Day.
The victory on that day led to the liberation of France from the Nazis and eventually the rest of Europe. Many of the Americans who fought on that day were trained right here in central Louisiana. And during World War II, 4 camps, Livingston, Claiborne, Polk, and Beauregard, were the training grounds of hundreds of thousands of American soldiers who would eventually go and fight in all theaters.
Yeah, known as the Louisiana Maneuvers, that training played a key role in the Americans' effectiveness on the battlefield.
It was a hard thing to do, and yet we suffered a tremendous amount of casualties. So we always want to remember, in France every year celebrates this, as well as Belgium and Netherlands, because they knew that without the Americans and the rest of the Allied forces that they would have been under occupation a lot longer than they did.
And of course, all day today, we will thank and remember those who fought on that day.